My husband's best friend dropped our baby while high, trapping him in a cry I'll never forget. And when I confronted Pete with video proof of him swaying on our porch as baby Oliver screamed, he brushed it off as just 2 pills, but 6 months later he collapsed in a grocery store parking lot, gasping for air as if the ground had swallowed him whole. You won't believe what happened. The man my husband called his best friend, the Uncle Pete our baby adored, shattered our entire world in a single drugged-out moment. What followed? A betrayal so deep, a fight so brutal, it still leaves me breathless. And for a long time, it felt like I was the only one who truly grasped the horror, the only one screaming into the void. 6 months ago, I would have rushed to hug Pete, but now, as he walked through our front door, acting like the lovable Uncle Pete instead of the piece of filth who destroyed my son's brain, the scent of his cologne made my stomach churn. I was secretly testing a recording app on my phone, my hands clammy. See, that Saturday started perfect. My husband Ian was working overtime again, and Pete offered to babysit Oliver while I grabbed groceries. I kissed Oliver's soft forehead, and he reached for Pete with that huge, gummy smile, a smile I'd never see in the same way again. Just 2 hours later, Pete was back on our porch, looking like death. He stammered, "Oliver, he just rolled right off the couch." He kept repeating it over and over like a broken record. That should have been my first clue. 3 days. 72 grueling hours of tests. And then the doctor said the words that ended everything. Brain damage. Permanent. Our 9-month-old, who'd been pulling himself up on furniture, would now need years of therapy just to maybe tie his own shoes. He'd never catch a baseball, never dance at prom, might not even write his name. $847 per session, 3 times a week. Forever. Can you imagine that? Forever. But wait, it gets so much worse. A month later, our neighbor, Mrs. Clark, knocked on my door. She had security footage from her driveway camera, something she thought I should see. The timestamp was 2:47 p.m., right when Oliver was supposed to be napping. Pete was carrying Oliver outside. Then he stumbled on our front steps, and my baby's tiny body went flying through the air. Pete stood there, swaying, for 42 seconds while Oliver screamed on the concrete. 42 agonizing seconds before he picked him up. You know what kills me? I knew that walk, that sway. Every weekend in college, every family BBQ where Pete got loose. He was high as a kite while watching my baby. When I showed Ian the video, his jaw did that thing it does when he's biting back words. He told me, "Pete's been struggling. Since the divorce, he finally managed." He wouldn't get high babysitting, Ian insisted. But he did. And Ian knew it. That's when something clicked. Ian's face wasn't shocked. It was resigned. Like he'd been waiting for this exact conversation. The confrontation at Pete's apartment was pathetic. I made Ian put his phone on speaker. Pete crumbled immediately. Just a couple pills for his back. Didn't think they'd hit so hard. He'd been taking Oliver out for fresh air, he claimed, when he tripped. He said he was sorry, as if that could fix anything. I started, documenting everything. I couldn't help it. Every therapy appointment where Oliver cried in frustration. Every missed milestone. Every night, watching his little body betray him. My beautiful baby, who should have been walking by now, was dragging himself across the floor. Ian grew distant, as I grew obsessed. He'd chosen his bromance over our son's future. Pete started coming by when Ian worked. Guilty conscience, probably. He'd sit on the same couch he claimed Oliver fell from, watching Oliver struggle with toy locks. I tried to kick him out, but Ian said he deserved to be there. Then one day, Pete offered me $5,000, like he'd dented our car, not destroyed our baby's future. I took it, and I kept recording. During one visit, Pete really broke down. I shouldn't have taken those pills. I knew I was too messed up. I just thought I could handle it. Kelsey warned me I was getting bad again. There it was. Confession. Recorded. But here's where it gets really twisted. When I told Ian I was going to the police, he said he'd leave me. If you destroy Pete's life, I can't stay married to you. Haven't you seen how destroyed he is? That night, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the word destruction echoing in my mind. Oliver, who would need care forever. Pete, who Ian claimed was destroyed. Justice versus loyalty. Our son's future versus a friendship. At 3 a.m., I made my choice. I called a lawyer, then the cops. Ian packed a bag before breakfast. Pete was arrested within a week. Possession, child endangerment, assault on a minor. His parents hired expensive lawyers. My case was strong, but not guaranteed. Trials take years. Oliver's therapy couldn't wait. That's when Pete's parents offered $200,000 and an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, if I drop all charges. Ian called, begging me to take it. Pete is sewer slid. Prison will kill him. Oliver needs money more than revenge. I hung up on my husband. Then Pete's girlfriend, Kelsey, the one who'd warned him, called. She told me about Pete's dealer, how he'd been asking about the lady who got Pete locked up. He knew where we lived. Just thought you should know, she said. I was so scared I bought a weapon the next day. I never thought I'd be that person. The trial was set to start in 3 weeks. I'd lost everything. My marriage, my best friend, my financial security. But when Oliver smiles at me with that crooked smile that just breaks my heart, I know I'm doing the right thing. I wish I could tell you it ended there, but it didn't. One morning, as I loaded Oliver into his car seat for therapy, I spotted Pete's car parked across the street. Tinted windows. I couldn't see inside, but I knew he was watching. My hands fumbled with the buckles while Oliver squirmed, his little legs kicking in that uncoordinated way that reminded me of what we'd lost. The metal clicked into place just as Pete's engine started. He pulled away slowly, like he wanted me to know he'd been there. At the therapy center, I carried Oliver through the automatic doors and froze. Pete's mother sat in the waiting room, her grandson on her lap. The same grandson Pete had been watching during family gatherings before everything fell apart. She looked up and our eyes met. The air felt thick. I signed Oliver in at the desk, then found a seat as far from her as possible. Other children played with blocks on the floor while we sat in suffocating silence. Oliver reached toward the toys, making those frustrated sounds when his body wouldn't cooperate. Pete's mother unconsciously shifted her grandson, mimicking Oliver's struggling movements. Her hand went to her mouth when she realized what she was doing. The therapy assistant called another child's name, leaving us alone, except for 2 other mothers absorbed in their phones. Pete's mother cleared her throat. I kept my eyes on Oliver, but she stood and approached anyway. Her voice cracked as she mentioned the NDA offer, asking if I'd reconsidered. The words burst out, before I could stop them. About Oliver never walking normally, about the future stolen from him. My voice echoed off the walls. The other mothers looked up, saw me towering over a grandmother holding a baby, and quickly gathered their children closer. The therapist appeared in the doorway, Oliver's name on her lips, but her expression changed when she saw us. She called Oliver's name again, more firmly. I scooped him up and followed her down the hall. In the private room, she asked about my stress levels while Oliver worked with the parallel bars. She mentioned resources for parents dealing with trauma, her tone careful and professional. She needed to know if the waiting room incident would be a pattern. I apologized, explaining the situation without details. She nodded but made notes in Oliver's file. Back in the waiting room, Pete's mother was showing photos to the other parents, dabbing at her eyes. I caught fragments. Going through so much. And breakdown. And poor thing. She touched Oliver's head as we passed, right where the scar tissue had formed. Her fingers lingered on the spot where her son's actions had changed everything. By the time we got home, Pete's mother had already posted in Oliver's therapy Facebook group. The Concerned Grandmother Act had worked perfectly. Parents who'd been supportive now wondered about the incident at therapy. My phone buzzed, with notifications as I struggled to get Oliver inside. 3 missed calls, the bank, Ian's lawyer, and a number I didn't recognize. The bank's automated system informed me about an overdrawn account while Oliver fussed in his high chair. The mobility equipment company had processed the payment for his new walker, but Ian hadn't transferred his portion of the household expenses. I hung up and called the equipment company, but they'd already shipped the order. Canceling would mean losing the deposit and waiting another month. Ian's lawyer left a voicemail about custody paperwork that needed immediate attention. The papers had been served to my old address, and I had 72 hours to respond. The timestamp showed they had been sent an hour after the bank processed the equipment payment. While I listened to the message again, Oliver knocked his cup off the tray. The milk spread across the floor, and I cleaned up the mess while calculating what groceries I could skip this week. The equipment took priority. Oliver needed it for therapy. But an empty fridge would photograph well for Ian's custody case. The receipt from the medical supply company printed with a timestamp, 2:47 p.m., the exact minute Pete had been arrested weeks ago. My hands shook as I filed it with the others. Pete's car appeared again when I took Oliver to the grocery store. This time he parked near the entrance, I circled the lot twice before finding a spot where I could watch him. He sat slumped in the driver's seat, one hand pressed to his chest. His body jerked forward. Then again. Other shoppers started noticing. A woman knocked on his window. Pete's door flew open and he stumbled out, gasping. The woman called 911 while Pete collapsed against his car. I wanted to leave, but Oliver was crying, reacting to the sirens growing closer. The EMTs arrived and surrounded Pete. One of them looked familiar from Oliver's NICU days. They loaded Pete onto a gurney while shoppers gathered to watch. I had to drive past the scene to leave. Oliver's cries grew louder at the sirens. The same sound from the day everything changed. At daycare the next morning, Oliver's teacher mentioned Pete's visits during drop-off. She called him that nice friend who always asked about Oliver's progress. She wondered if he'd still come by now that he was sick. Someone had told her about his anxiety attacks, how the stress of the situation was destroying his health. She touched my arm gently, saying she understood how hard this must be for everyone involved. I spent the morning driving Pete's usual routes. His car sat in the pharmacy parking lot. Through the windshield, I spotted a medication bottle on the passenger seat. The label faced up, clearly showing the prescription date. The day before. Oliver's injury. Evidence in plain sight. But touching it would be trespassing. Taking a photo through the window would look like stalking. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching proof I couldn't legally obtain. The local mom blog post appeared that afternoon. My photo from the grocery store parking lot showed me sitting in my car, hair unwashed, staring at nothing while Pete was loaded into an ambulance. The blogger wrote about tragedy tearing a family apart, about mental health resources for struggling parents. Pete's photo showed him surrounded by concerned EMTs, a grieving friend dealing with trauma. The contrast was perfect. Comments poured in about the poor man and the vindictive ex-friend. Oliver's pediatrician called about insurance forms. Pete was still listed as an emergency contact, and they needed his signature for claim processing. The receptionist suggested I bring the forms to Pete directly since it would be faster than mailing them. She mentioned he'd been so helpful during Oliver's early appointments, always asking the right questions. The appointment was scheduled for tomorrow. I'd have to see him face to face. My sister texted that evening, her words carefully chosen. She reminded me about the divorce talks with Ian last year, how I'd pushed everyone away then too. You stopped eating then too, she added, like my weight loss was the real problem. She meant well, but her concern felt like another weight pressing down. I looked at Oliver struggling with his dinner, food smeared across his face, and wondered if she was right about me pushing people away. The neighborhood Facebook group had screenshotted my texts about Pete. Someone had shared my angry messages from weeks ago, reframing them as harassment against an accident victim. The post had 47 reactions and dozens of comments about getting me help. They discussed my stalking behavior and whether someone should report it. Ian's lawyer would have screenshots within hours. I documented everything anyway, the way neighbors crossed the street when I walked Oliver, the whispers at the mailbox, the sudden silence when I entered the therapy waiting room. Each incident went into my file, evidence of the narrative being built against me. Pete's visits to Oliver's favorite places, his Instagram stories from the park where Oliver took his first steps, the coffee shop where we'd celebrated Oliver's first word, all tagged with healing hashtags while I looked unstable. My phone rang at midnight. Sarah's voice was thick with tears. Her husband had given her an ultimatum: stop supporting my vendetta or lose her marriage. She believed me, she said, but she couldn't lose everything over this. She had her own children to think about. The line went dead before I could respond. My best friend since college, the one who'd held my hand during Oliver's birth, had chosen her marriage over testimony. I checked the toxic people Facebook thread before bed. My name appeared in the original post now, with members agreeing about my unstable behavior. They shared stories about seeing me at the store, at therapy, around the neighborhood. Each story painted me as more unhinged. Pete's mother had joined the group, sharing her concern for her son and grandson. The grandson who could walk, who could run, who would never know what his uncle had stolen from Oliver. The bank called again the next morning. Another payment had bounced. Ian's lawyer served papers at the door while I was on the phone. The custody filing claimed I was creating an unstable environment for Oliver. Evidence included the therapy incident, my harassment of Pete, and concerns about my mental state. The doorbell rang again, a delivery of Oliver's mobility equipment I could no longer afford. I signed for the equipment while reading the custody papers. Everything I'd done to seek justice was being used against me. the security footage I'd saved, the recordings I'd made, the documentation of Oliver's struggles, all proof of my obsession rather than evidence of Pete's crime. Oliver watched from his special chair, reaching for the box with his new walker inside. His crooked smile broke my heart all over again. The truth was simple and brutal. This would end with one of us destroyed. Pete knew it. I knew it. There was no middle ground between justice and mercy, between Oliver's future and Pete's freedom. Every choice pushed us further toward that ending. Every document filed, every word spoken, every day that passed with Oliver struggling to do what other children did without thinking. I assembled the walker while Oliver napped. The instructions showed a smiling child taking confident steps. The reality would be months of frustration, tears, and tiny victories that felt like defeats. Pete would never see those struggles. Ian would claim I was being dramatic, but I'd be there for every failed attempt, every cry of frustration. Every night, Oliver's body betrayed him in his sleep. The walker stood ready in our living room, a monument to what we'd lost and what we were fighting to reclaim. Tomorrow would bring more battles. The pediatrician visit, the custody response, the therapy session where everyone would watch me for signs of breaking. But tonight, I sat with Oliver on the floor, helping him reach for toys just beyond his grasp, documenting each attempt, building our case one heartbreak at a time. The coffee shop encounter happened during my morning routine. Pete sat at the corner table where our support group usually met, humming Oliver's favorite lullaby while stirring his coffee. My hands tightened on Oliver's stroller handles as Pete's eyes found mine. He continued the melody, matching the exact rhythm I used during Oliver's bedtime struggles. Other customers glanced between us, sensing tension but not understanding. I wheeled Oliver to the opposite corner, but Pete's humming carried across the space. Each note calculated to remind me of what Oliver had lost. The custody exchange that afternoon became another battlefield. Pete arrived with Ian to pick up Oliver for the supervised visit. I handed over the diaper bag while Pete stood behind Ian, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Ian's lawyer later received Pete's version, that I'd threatened him in front of Oliver. My version described Pete's whispered suicide threats. The social worker supervising hadn't heard either exchange, only noting both parties seemed agitated. Oliver reached for Pete during the handoff, his small voice attempting sounds that resembled Uncle Pete. The words weren't clear, but Pete's satisfied expression suggested he'd been coaching Oliver during their video calls. My old phone backup revealed devastating evidence during the custody evaluation. Text messages from 2 years ago showed my enthusiasm about Pete's involvement with Oliver. "Pete's amazing with him, like a second dad," one message read. Another described how I trusted Pete completely with Oliver's care. The evaluator highlighted these messages as proof I'd previously considered Pete a suitable caregiver. My explanation about not knowing about his medication problem fell flat against my own glowing recommendations. Oliver's behavior during therapy sessions changed noticeably. When approaching the parallel bars, he started repeating a phrase that sounded like, "Uncle Pete, sorry." The therapist documented this new vocalization, unaware of its significance. I realized Pete had been repeating this during their visits, programming Oliver to parrot his apology. Other children in the therapy group picked up the phrase, turning it into a chant during exercises. Parents smiled at what seemed like toddler gibberish, while I watched Pete's manipulation take root in my son's limited vocabulary. The neighbors' nanny cam footage, what the camera couldn't capture, were Pete's whispered comments about Oliver's future, his predictions about my mental state, his suggestions that Oliver would be better off without me. The visual evidence supported Pete's claims while my truth remained invisible. Family court treated my substance accusations as parental alienation. The judge noted my attempts to exclude Pete from Oliver's life despite Ian's insistence on maintaining the relationship. My evidence of Pete's medication problem was reframed as an attempt to isolate Oliver from his father's support system. The court ordered me to facilitate Pete's relationship with Oliver, warning that continued alienation attempts could affect custody arrangements. Ian's old tablet revealed another betrayal. Pete had been video calling Oliver during supposed supervised visits using Ian's account that remained logged in. The call history showed daily conversations, some lasting over an hour. The last call's screenshot showed Oliver reaching toward the screen, Pete's face filling the display. Ian claimed ignorance, but the tablet's location services showed it had been at Pete's apartment repeatedly. Pete's Instagram stories created a false narrative of healing. Photos from Oliver's favorite park showed Pete sitting on the bench where Oliver took his first steps. The coffee shop where we'd celebrated Oliver's first word became the backdrop for Pete's healing journey posts. Pete is really playing the long game here. Programming a toddler to say, "Uncle Pete, sorry," during therapy is some next-level villain behavior that even Disney wouldn't touch. Each location held memories of Oliver's milestones, now claimed by Pete with hashtags like Char Hatch, Char Uncle Life, Char Forgiveness Path, Char Healing Through Pain. Followers commented their support, unaware they were validating the man who'd stolen those futures. My therapist received a subpoena for our session notes. The request specifically sought information about revenge fantasies and obsessive documentation I discussed during treatment. Privileged communication protections wavered when child custody was involved. My therapist warned me that certain statements could be misconstrued, that my detailed plans for justice might appear as unhealthy fixation rather than maternal protection. Recording attempts at custody exchanges backfired spectacularly. Pete spotted my phone during one handoff, immediately alerting the supervising social worker. My explanation about documenting interactions for legal protection sounded paranoid. Pete's comment to the social worker painted me as unstable. She's always recording me, even when I'm just trying to see Oliver. The incident report noted my concerning surveillance behavior and recommended increased supervision. Oliver's specialist appointment created impossible leverage. The developmental pediatrician could only see him at 3 p.m., exactly when Oliver needed pickup from daycare. With the restraining order keeping me from Pete's vicinity and Ian working, only Pete could retrieve Oliver. Missing the appointment meant losing the specialist's waitlist spot. Attending meant trusting Pete with pickup. I chose the appointment, spending the entire session distracted by images of Pete with Oliver. The physical therapist's withdrawal from my case shocked me. An anonymous complaint about unprofessional conduct had been filed with her licensing board. She couldn't risk her career on testimony. I have 3 kids to feed, she explained while packing Oliver's assessment files. Her husband worked construction. They couldn't afford the license review that would follow court involvement. Another professional ally disappeared, leaving Oliver's progress undocumented by credible witnesses. Pete's transformation became eerily specific. He started wearing the same cologne Ian used, styling his hair similarly. During visits, Oliver responded to Pete's familiar scent, reaching for him more readily. The supervised visit reports noted Oliver's positive attachment to Pete, unaware of the calculated mimicry. Pete adopted Ian's phrases, his gestures, even his way of holding Oliver. He was becoming the father figure he'd always wanted to be. The park negotiation felt like extortion. Pete offered a supervised visit at Oliver's favorite playground, the one with the adaptive swings he needed if I wrote a letter stating the fall was accidental. His parents needed the letter for their own peace of mind. He claimed the playground had the only equipment Oliver could use safely, but accessing it meant absolving Pete. I refused, and the next custody report noted I was denying the child. Positive male influence during father's absence. Pharmacy records revealed Pete's lie about timing. His prescription wasn't filled a week before Oliver's fall, as he'd testified. The pickup timestamp showed 11:47 a.m., the morning of the incident. He'd taken fresh pills just hours before offering to babysit. The pharmacist couldn't testify without corporate approval, but the printed records showed a pattern. Early refill requests, doctor shopping, multiple prescriptions. Pete had been high on newly acquired pills when I'd trusted him with Oliver. Mrs. Clark's doorbell camera contained unexpected audio. Neither of us had known it recorded sound through her open windows. The files captured Pete's visits to my house, including slurred confessions to Oliver during supervised visits. One recording caught Pete explaining how he'd wanted to be Oliver's real daddy, and how the accident had ruined his plans. His words were thick with medication and regret, but clear enough for evidence. The morning I'd left Oliver with Pete haunted me through new evidence. Mrs. Clark's audio revealed I'd noticed Pete stumbling when he arrived. My voice on the recording showed hesitation, then acceptance of his assurance he was totally fine. I'd seen the warning signs, but needed childcare desperately. The custody evaluator would later use this as evidence of my negligent supervision, turning my victimhood into complicity. Something feels off about how perfectly all these pieces are falling into place against her. The therapist getting subpoenaed right when she needs support. The pharmacy tech investigation backfiring. Pete somehow mimicking Ian's exact cologne and mannerisms. The evaluator noted this showed awareness of potential impairment. My failure to press harder became evidence of negligent supervision. My mother faced an impossible choice at her birthday dinner. Supporting me meant losing access to Oliver through Ian's custody time. Staying neutral meant betraying her daughter. She chose silence, limiting my childcare options during court appearances. Dad pulled me aside during cake, begging me to drop the case. "You're torturing all of us," he said, while Oliver struggled with his special spoon. The family fracture widened with each court date. Pete's AA sponsor became an unwitting information source. I started shopping at his grocery store, building false rapport through casual conversations. Recovery philosophy encouraged openness, and the sponsor shared Pete's progress without realizing my identity. Pete had been attending meetings, he said, working through his guilt about the accident that changed everything. The sponsor's pride in Pete's recovery felt like acid in my ears. The pharmacy encounter provided crucial intelligence. While waiting for Oliver's prescription, I overheard Pete arguing with a pharmacist about an early refill request. Insurance wouldn't cover it. He'd have to pay cash. His hands shook as he fumbled for his wallet. The pharmacist's firm denial sent Pete storming out, leaving behind evidence of ongoing addiction despite his recovery claims. Mrs. Clark became our secret weapon. She retrieved her doorbell camera files before Pete's lawyer realized they existed. Hours of audio revealed Pete's deteriorating mental state during visits. His slurred confessions to Oliver included admissions of guilt, expressions of suicidal ideation, and increasingly delusional plans to fix everything. Oliver's babbling responses were heartbreaking, his limited vocabulary trying to comfort the man who destroyed his future. Ian's new girlfriend emerged at the worst moment. Catherine from his office had always understood him better. According to her custody testimony, she'd witnessed Ian's distress over the situation, his struggle to balance loyalty and fatherhood. Her statement painted me as the aggressor, Ian as the victim, and Pete as a friend caught in tragedy. Oliver had met her several times during Ian's custody time, another relationship I couldn't control. Missing Oliver's milestone evaluation felt like another failure. The developmental assessment required both parents' presence, but I was meeting with lawyers while Ian brought Catherine instead. The report noted mother's absence and documented Oliver's first successful steps with his walker, witnessed by his father's girlfriend instead of me. The evaluation marked me as a non-compliant parent, despite my years of solo therapy appointments. Financial destruction came in waves. The legal retainer drained our savings while Pete's parents funded his defense through their victim impact fund. My job suffered from constant court dates and emergency custody hearings. The final termination letter cited excessive absences affecting performance. My replacement started the following Monday. One of Pete's NA friends, Oliver, noticed him attempting sounds that might have been recognition. I filmed Pete's shaking hands, his obvious distress, adding it to my evidence file while other diners enjoyed normal meals. Living in my sister's basement meant Pete had won another round. He house-sat for Ian during a business trip, posting photos from Oliver's nursery. The images showed him reading Oliver's favorite books, sitting in the chair where I nursed my baby, touching toys that held memories of better days. Each post twisted the knife deeper, Pete claiming spaces that should have been sacred, protected from his presence. The pharmacy tech investigation spiraled beyond intention. My inquiries about Pete's prescription patterns triggered a corporate audit. The tech, a single mother, was suspended pending investigation. Her daughter's asthma medication went unfilled while she waited for clearance. The tech's husband blamed me for their financial crisis, his wife guilty only of following proper procedures. I continued pushing despite knowing innocent people suffered for my pursuit of justice. My sister's question during Oliver's treatment cut deep. "What if you're wrong about it being intentional?" she asked, while watching Oliver struggle with basic movements. The question hung between us as Oliver cried in frustration, his body failing him again. I couldn't answer because intention didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Oliver's future was stolen whether Pete meant to drop him or not. The custody hearing exposed my own culpability. Under oath, I admitted knowing Pete had substance issues before leaving Oliver with him. The lawyer pressed, "Hadn't I seen him stumble? Hadn't Kelsey warned me?" Yes, I'd known, but I'd needed help, and Pete had always managed before. My desperation for childcare had overruled my judgment. The admission cracked my victim status, revealing my role in enabling the tragedy. Audio evidence revealed another damning detail. Mrs. Clark's recording captured me asking Pete about his medication that morning. His assurance that he was totally fine came through clearly, as did my acceptance. I'd questioned his state and accepted his lie. My failure to press harder became evidence of negligent supervision. Pete's legal team moved strategically, filing to combine criminal and custody cases. One judge would decide everything. The same evidence would determine Pete's freedom and Oliver's future. The motion's timing, filed immediately after my job loss, suggested careful planning. One courtroom would now host the complete destruction of our intertwined lives. The revelation of Pete's true motivation explained everything. During a recorded visit, Pete told Oliver about watching Ian neglect him, about wanting to matter to someone who needed him. His confession revealed years of resentment toward Ian's casual fatherhood, Pete's desire to be the better parent. The accident had destroyed his fantasy of replacing Ian in Oliver's life. His guilt stemmed not from hurting Oliver, but from ruining his own chance at surrogate fatherhood. Oliver's trust became a weapon I had to wield. Preparing him to testify meant explaining that Uncle Pete had hurt him. Oliver's limited understanding made the betrayal worse. He cried when I said Pete was bad. His small vocabulary, unable to process why his uncle couldn't visit anymore. Each therapy session where Oliver asked for Pete felt like driving nails into my own hands. I was destroying my son's innocence to build our case. The family gathering intelligence operation succeeded through tragedy. Pete's nephew, playing with Oliver during a supervised visit at Ian's parents' house, mentioned Uncle's sleepy medicine while acting out a game. The 4-year-old's innocent revelation that Uncle Pete took medicine that made him silly provided corroborating evidence of Pete's impairment around children. The child's parents were horrified, having trusted Pete with their own son. Watching Pete sob at Oliver's therapy center hollowed out my victory. We'd both arrived for different appointments, freezing when we saw each other. Pete broke down completely, collapsing against the wall while other families stared. His grief was genuine. We were both mourning the same loss, the same destroyed future. Oliver reached toward Pete from his wheelchair, not understanding why Uncle Pete was crying. We sat in our respective corners, 2 adults destroyed by one moment of impaired judgment. Pete's counterclaim gained momentum through careful documentation. His lawyer argued my negligent supervision enabled the situation. Evidence showed I'd known about Pete's issues, seen him impaired, and still left Oliver in his care. The pattern of enabling behavior, documented through texts and recordings, supported Pete's claim that I shared responsibility. The victim narrative crumbled as my complicity emerged. Everything hinged on Ian's testimony about Pete's substance history. My husband held the key to establishing Pete's pattern of impairment, but Ian's loyalty wavered between his son and his friend. His deposition would determine whether Pete's addiction was documented fact or a recent development. The man who'd chosen friendship over family now controlled our fate. His testimony could validate my claims or destroy them. Completely. Pete's mother's plea hit every emotional trigger. She cornered me at the courthouse, chemotherapy port visible above her collar. I'd driven her to treatments 2 years ago when Pete was too high to help. Now she begged me to spare her son, invoking the life debt between us. You saved my life. Why destroy my son's? The question ignored what her son had destroyed, but the pain in her eyes was real. Both mothers were losing everything to Pete's choices. Former colleagues chose sides based on career implications. Pete's family had connections throughout our industry. Supporting me meant professional suicide. One by one, witnesses recanted or softened their statements. The coworker who'd seen Pete high at company events suddenly couldn't recall specifics. My isolation grew as Pete's network protected itself. Oliver and I stood alone against an infrastructure of enablement. The judge's ruling created new obstacles. Criminal conviction had to precede custody modifications without a current active threat. Past incidents, however documented, couldn't justify immediate custody changes. The legal timeline stretched endlessly while Oliver needed intervention now. Each day of delay meant more missed developmental opportunities, more entrenchment of his limitations. Calling in NICU favors felt like cashing emotional chips. The nurses who'd watched Oliver fight for life in his first days remembered Pete's visits. I reminded them of overtime shifts covered, holiday schedules swapped, the currency of workplace relationships. One nurse provided a written statement about Pete's behavior during NICU visits, his questions about baby handling, his obvious impairment during some visits. She wouldn't testify in person, fearing license review, but her statement added to our evidence mountain. The safety briefing revelation changed everything. Hospital records showed Pete had attended mandatory NICU safety training about infant handling. He'd signed acknowledgments about never holding babies while impaired. The documentation proved Pete knew the risks, had been explicitly trained, and chose to ignore that training. His accident defense crumbled against his signed understanding of infant safety protocols. Oliver's developmental milestones became evidence of loss. Medical records documented his achievements before the fall: pulling to stand, furniture, cruising, pre-walking skills. The typical development that should have been celebrated became proof of what Pete had stolen. Each milestone Oliver had reached made his current limitations more devastating. The child who'd been ahead of schedule now struggled with basics. Accepting my role in Oliver's injury meant testifying against myself. The truth included my desperation for childcare, my willful blindness to Pete's condition, my choice of convenience over caution. Justice required admitting I'd failed Oliver too. The courtroom would hear how I'd enabled Pete's access, ignored warning signs, prioritized my errands over my son's safety. Truth was the only path to justice, even truth that indicted me. Pete's deposition exposed crucial lies. He claimed 6 months of sobriety before Oliver's fall. Pharmacy records showed weekly refills, multiple prescriptions, doctor shopping throughout that period. The sworn lie opened him to perjury charges, adding criminal weight to civil proceedings. His lawyer's face revealed surprise. Pete had lied to counsel too. The fabrication unraveled his credibility across all testimony. Presenting evidence required emotional suppression. I displayed pharmacy records, medical documentation, recorded confessions without reaction. The jury needed facts, not a mother's rage. Pete's moment of recognition played across his features as each piece of evidence built upon the last. His lawyer's objections grew increasingly desperate. The methodical presentation left no room for reasonable doubt while I remained stone-faced, professional, dignified in my pursuit of justice. Both legal teams prepared for verdicts that would reshape 3 lives. Criminal trial and custody decisions loomed like twin executioners. Pete faced potential imprisonment and permanent separation from Oliver. I faced potential loss of full custody if the negligent supervision claim succeeded. Ian faced choosing between son and friend in final testimony. Oliver faced a future shaped by legal decisions he couldn't understand. We all waited for justice that would satisfy no one, heal nothing, but might protect Oliver from further harm. The equipment room at therapy became my sanctuary between battles. Surrounded by walkers, special chairs, and adaptive tools, I processed each day's revelations. Other parents passed through, gathering tools for their own children's struggles. We nodded silently, understanding without words the weight of altered futures. Oliver's walker stood among dozens, each representing a family's adjusted dreams. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more evidence, more careful steps toward resolution. Tonight, I helped Oliver practice with parallel bars, his determination teaching me that justice mattered less than his daily victories. The legal system would determine guilt and custody, but Oliver's progress would determine our actual future. The nurse's written statement arrived by courier the morning of the criminal trial. Her handwriting described Pete's NICU visits in clinical detail. The times he'd swayed while holding newborns, the questions about infant reflexes that seemed too specific. She'd documented everything in her personal notes, never imagining they'd matter. The prosecutor added it to our evidence pile while Pete's lawyer demanded authentication. The judge allowed it with restrictions. The courtroom filled with divided camps as testimony began. Pete's family occupied 3 rows behind the defense table. Oliver's therapist sat with the prosecution witnesses. Community members scattered throughout, their allegiances visible in their seating choices. A baby's cry echoed from the hallway. The sound made my chest tighten. Oliver was with my sister, too young to witness what would unfold here. Pete unconsciously rocked in his chair during opening statements, the motion mimicking how he'd soothed Oliver as a newborn. My hands gripped the evidence photos. Oliver before the fall, pulling himself up on furniture, that huge gummy smile, intact. Then the medical images showing the damage. The contrast made several jurors shift uncomfortably. Pete's rocking intensified. The prosecutor presented our evidence methodically. Security footage played on the courtroom screen. Pete, stumbling on my front steps at 2:47 p.m., Oliver's tiny body arcing through the air. The 42 seconds of Pete swaying while Oliver screamed on concrete felt like hours. Mrs. Clark's audio recordings followed, Pete's slurred confessions to Oliver during supervised visits filling the silent room. His admission about wanting to be Oliver's real daddy made his mother sob quietly. Medical experts testified about Oliver's documented milestones before the fall. The developmental pediatrician explained how a child pulling to stand at 9 months showed advanced motor skills. The fall's impact on such a developing brain created cascading damage. Oliver's current limitations, the dragging movements, the struggle with basic tasks, represented a profound loss of potential. Pete's lawyer couldn't dispute the medical evidence, only its relevance to criminal charges. Hospital records proved devastating for Pete's defense. The NICU safety training attendance sheet bore his signature. The briefing materials explicitly covered infant handling while impaired. Pete had signed acknowledgments, understanding the risks. The prosecutor displayed each document slowly, building a case of willful negligence rather than accident. Pete's "I didn't know" defense crumbled against his own signature. Pharmacy records created an undeniable timeline. Pete's prescription, filled at 11:47 a.m., the morning of Oliver's injury. Previous refills showed a pattern: early requests, multiple doctors, escalating doses. The pharmacist testified remotely, corporate lawyers flanking him on screen. He confirmed Pete's agitation, when refills were denied, the cash payments when insurance wouldn't cover early fills, the addiction pattern stretched back 2 years. Ian took the stand as a hostile witness for the prosecution. His loyalty to Pete wavered against sworn testimony requirements. The prosecutor pressed about Pete's substance history, their college experiences, the weekend parties where Pete got too loose. Ian's jaw worked as he chose words carefully. He admitted knowing about Pete's occasional medication use, but claimed ignorance about the extent. His testimony felt rehearsed, protective. Catherine appeared as a defense witness, describing my erratic behavior during custody exchanges. She painted a picture of an unstable mother obsessed with revenge. Her testimony about my harassment of Pete relied on secondhand accounts from Ian. The prosecutor's cross-examination revealed she'd never actually witnessed any exchanges, only heard Ian's version. Her credibility crumbled, but damage was done. Pete's deposition lies became perjury evidence. The prosecutor played his recorded claim of 6-month sobriety before Oliver's fall. Pharmacy records displayed simultaneously showed weekly refills throughout that period. Pete's lawyer objected frantically, but the evidence stood. Perjury charges would be added to the criminal case. Pete's face drained of color as he realized the implications. My own testimony required brutal honesty. I admitted seeing Pete stumble that morning, questioning his medication, accepting his assurance. The defense attorney pressed hard. Why had I left Oliver with someone I suspected was impaired? My explanation about desperation for childcare, about trusting our history, sounded weak even to me. I'd enabled the situation through my choices. The admission felt like swallowing glass. Mrs. Clark testified with quiet dignity. She'd retrieved her doorbell camera files before anyone realized they contained audio. Her testimony about Pete's visits, his deteriorating state, his confessions to Oliver provided crucial corroboration. The defense couldn't shake her credibility. A 70-year-old retiree with no stake in the outcome except truth. She looked at Pete with disappointment rather than anger. Pete's mother took the stand for the defense, her chemotherapy port visible above her collar. She described her son's struggle since his divorce, his love for Oliver, his devastation after the accident. Her plea for mercy moved several jurors to tears. But under cross-examination, she admitted Pete had hidden his medication use from her, that she'd noticed his behavior changes but hadn't pressed. Even his mother's love couldn't erase the evidence. The digital forensics expert authenticated Mrs. Clark's recordings despite defense claims of potential manipulation. Voice analysis confirmed Pete's speech patterns, medication-induced slurring consistent with opioid impairment. The technology testimony went over some jurors' heads, but the conclusion was clear. The recordings were genuine. Pete's confessions to Oliver stood as evidence. Pete's breakdown during his own testimony revealed the delusion driving everything. He described watching Ian neglect Oliver, seeing a child who needed a real father figure. His fantasy of replacing Ian in Oliver's life had made him volunteer for babysitting, push for more involvement. The pills were for back pain, he insisted, but his need to matter to Oliver had made him ignore his impairment. He sobbed about destroying his chance to be the father Oliver deserved. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty of child endangerment, guilty of assault on a minor. The perjury charge would be tried separately. Pete collapsed at the defense table while his mother wailed. I felt no satisfaction, only hollow acknowledgement. Oliver would still struggle tomorrow. The verdict changed nothing about his daily reality. Sentencing recommendations allowed victim impact statements. I requested rehabilitation over maximum imprisonment. Oliver needed healing, not extended destruction. Mandatory parenting classes, addiction treatment, supervised therapy, consequences that might prevent another family's tragedy. The judge would decide, but I'd spoken for Oliver's future rather than my rage. The custody ruling followed within days. Full custody returned to me, with Ian receiving supervised visits twice weekly. Pete was banned from any contact with Oliver until age 18. The restraining order would remain permanent. Ian's lawyer tried arguing for expanded access, but his choice to enable Pete throughout had consequences. Catherine wouldn't be allowed at visits. Community fractures became permanent. The neighborhood watch group disbanded after infighting between those who'd supported justice and those who'd enabled denial. Local businesses chose sides. The coffee shop where Pete had hummed Oliver's lullaby banned him, while the grocery store where he'd had his panic attack offered him work. Oliver's therapy center implemented new screening procedures for waiting room incidents. Mrs. Clark began bringing dinners twice weekly. She'd become an unexpected ally. This woman who'd simply checked her security footage and found truth. Her quiet support, casseroles left on my porch, offers to watch Oliver during legal appointments, meant more than grand gestures. She understood. That justice was just the beginning of rebuilding. Financial reality set in immediately. Legal fees had drained everything. Ian's court-ordered child support would help, but Oliver's therapy needs exceeded any reasonable budget. I applied for every available assistance program, swallowing pride with each form. The mobility equipment company offered a payment plan after learning about the case. Small mercies in an expensive future. Pete began court-ordered treatment at a facility 40 miles away. His parents drove him to sessions, their car sometimes passing our neighborhood. I'd see his mother's face through the window, aged 10 years and 6 months. We'd both lost the lives we'd planned. Only Oliver's needs kept me from drowning in the parallel grief. Setting up protections for Oliver became my obsession. Medical power of attorney documents specified decision-making hierarchies. Trust fund structures ensured any settlement money would go solely to his care. The restraining order details covered every possible scenario. I'd learned how quickly trust could shatter a child's future. These papers were walls against that happening again. Ian's first supervised visit took place at a neutral facility. He arrived alone, Catherine relegated to the parking lot. Oliver reached for his father with the same enthusiasm he'd once shown Pete. Ian's face crumpled as he helped Oliver with his walker, finally seeing what his loyalty had caused. The supervisor noted positive interaction, but emotional distress from the father. My hypervigilance became permanent. Every therapy appointment included arrival checks for familiar cars. Each milestone Oliver achieved got documented with timestamps and witnesses. Trust in others' judgment had died with Oliver's typical development. I'd become the mother who verified everything, questioned everyone, assumed nothing. It exhausted me, but it kept Oliver safe. The civil settlement negotiations dragged through winter. Pete's parents offered structured payments for Oliver's lifetime care needs. Their retirement savings would fund his therapy, equipment, and future support. No amount could restore what was lost, but Oliver needed resources more than he needed their suffering. We reached agreement without trial. Oliver's progress happened in microscopic increments. The walker helped him move independently, though each step required enormous effort. His speech developed slowly, words emerging through determination, rather than natural development. He'd never be the child who caught baseballs or danced at prom, but he was becoming the child who refused to quit trying. I returned to work part-time, finding an employer who understood therapy schedules and court appointments. The income helped, but mostly I needed purpose beyond Oliver's injury. Co-workers who'd known me before saw the change. The constant alertness, the rigid boundaries, the inability to trust anyone with Oliver. I'd become someone shaped entirely by prevention of further harm. Pete completed 6 months of inpatient treatment. His parents sent updates through lawyers, progress reports, therapy milestones, sobriety chips earned. I filed them without you reading. His recovery mattered only as it related to Oliver's safety. Whether Pete found peace or purpose wasn't my concern. He'd made his choices. We lived with consequences. Spring brought Oliver's 3rd birthday. The party stayed small. My sister's family, Mrs. Clark, 2 children from therapy group. Oliver blew out candles from his special chair. Cake smeared across his face in joy. The photos showed a different child than we'd imagined 3 years ago, but still our child, still fighting, still smiling that crooked smile that broke and healed my heart simultaneously. 18 months after the trial, I watched Oliver take assisted steps at therapy. Pete remained in treatment, maintaining sobriety under court supervision. Ian had rebuilt trust through consistent supervised visits, slowly earning expanded time. Catherine had disappeared from our periphery. The community had settled into new patterns around our changed reality. Oliver would need lifetime support. The beautiful baby who'd reached for Pete with complete trust now moved through the world, with limitations that trust had created. But he moved through it with a determination I'd never imagined. Each assisted step, each hard-won word, each small victory built our new future on the ruins of the old one. I'd changed too. The mother who'd kissed Oliver's forehead. That Saturday morning, trusting easily, choosing convenience. She'd died on my front steps at 2:47 p.m. What remained was someone harder, more vigilant, less forgiving, but more fierce. Someone who understood that protection meant constant alertness, that love meant preventing harm above all else. We'd all been destroyed and remade by 42 seconds of a man swaying while a baby screamed. The reverberations would last forever. In Oliver's struggles, in my hypervigilance, in Pete's mandated sobriety, in Ian's supervised fatherhood. Justice had been served, but justice couldn't restore what was lost. We could only build forward from the wreckage, one assisted step at a time.